welcome to the Auto Guide Show, brought to you by eBay Motors. This week, we say goodbye to a Lexus. We say welcome back to a Dodge. We compare some three-row SUVs, and there's some news from Nissan. But first, a word from our sponsor. Picture this. You're halfway through a DIY car fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. It's okay, because you know whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got everything: brakes, headlights, cold air intakes, whatever you need, and it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers and hoping you ordered the right thing. All the parts you need, at the prices you'll love, guaranteed fit every time. eBay, things people love. All right, so this will be the first of a sort of new format for the show. It actually really isn't, but it's the transitional show. So there will be no more question of the week. We will be doing our What's Next much shorter. We will continue to have Greg on that we started last week, but we'll have longer interviews with some very, very, very interesting people, except for this week because it's just me and Kyle. So
hey, we're not interesting?
Yeah, well, that's... Someone's listening to this. I hope we are, because we hope they come back. But.
Yeah.
So kicking off, we will talk about really the only car review comparison that was published this week, because you've been very busy collecting new content, and I've been busy making videos on other things. So this happened a little while ago, and it seems like a odd comparison on the surface, but there's a lot of connections, and that's the Ford Explorer versus the Mazda CX-90. Connection one: they both have their engines pointing north-south. They are both rear drive bias, so the engines aren't sideways powering the front wheels. They're both rear wheel bias all-wheel drive. Second, they used to be partners. I mean, Ford never owned Mazda, but they had a very big stake, and the two of them were making siblings for a long time, sort of like Hyundai Kia were.
Yeah, I think up until fairly recently, right? Like at least one of them was still using a shared platform that the other had designed. I think now the 3 is actually its own separate thing, but the previous generation one was shared with the Ford Focus in Europe.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. The CX-7 was Ford co-developed. I don't know if Ford had a equivalent, but I know like that was part of that. So that's the last one of the Mazdas I can think of, because the last 6 was its own thing too.
It's true. Yeah. And then
like the 6 before that was just a fusion with different lights.
I think the CX-5 kind of marked the end of their collaboration era too, right? Because they had the Tribute before, which was just an Escape, and then it's like, here's our first fresh SUV, and now Mazda basically makes only SUVs.
Hey, I'm driving a 3 this week, but we'll talk more about that later.
Yes.
Yeah. So this was not surprising, I think, going into it. I mean, if you want to go super high level, the Mazda's more stylish. I was going to say Forester. I don't know why I said that. The Explorer is more practical. But there are some nuances. Like, for somehow the turbo 4-cylinder in the Explorer is more powerful and sounds more like a 6-cylinder due to synthetic noise, which is odd.
Yeah, I mean, so it's more powerful on paper. I think in real world they're basically a wash, because the Mazda is a lot torqueier. But I think both of us were surprised that we preferred the Ford's transmission. It's weird, because the Ford 10-speed has earned a lot of criticism from us in the past in various different applications. But part of the update for the 25 Explorer is that they've really worked on the tuning, and it shows, right? Like, it's actually a pretty solid transmission now.
It's like it's like a switch went off, because every vehicle that had the 10-speed, from Mustang to pickup truck, we complained about how it didn't know what it wanted to do. And then suddenly in 24 model year, everything's like, oh, this is really good now. So kudos to Ford. They listened to the criticism and fixed it. I think Mazdas will fix too. It's just they haven't had a chance. Like, this is only the second model year of the CX-90. And I think the first update, there will be new programming, because that's really, I think, what it is. I don't think there's anything mechanically wrong. It's just that 45, 50 mile an hour point, the vehicle doesn't know which gear it wants to be in. And when you let go of the throttle, it downshifts like 4 gears, and then as soon as you touch it, it wants to upshift like 4 gears. So it's just a weird, like, on the highway it doesn't do it as much, and in the city it doesn't. But got a lot of country roads, they'll try and take you home. That's gonna happen.
It's it was good, and I think overall we prefer the Mazda very slightly, because that that sense of quality does go a long way. The Ford's interior is improved for 2025, but it's still not great. But like you said at the beginning of this, the Explorer is so practical. It has the better third row. It has the better second row. It has a slightly bigger trunk. And it has, let's not even talk about the tech advantage that the Ford has.
Yeah, it's not like Ford has the better tech. It's just they give you more for the price at this specific trim point. And people who complain about a 4-cylinder and an Explorer, like, it's 300 horsepower. Like, V8 Explorers never had that. Well, they did at the end, but anyway, you could go around saying you have the Mustang drivetrain. You know, the 2.3, 300 horsepower, 10-speed auto. Like, I know it's not quite the same, but
you have a Mustang SUV. Wait, no, they make that.
It really comes down to the whole left brain, right brain, where, like you said, we both prefer the CX-90, but if I'm buying one, I'm probably buying the Explorer because I'm older and I'm more practical now. I'm over those days of living with compromises for cool factor.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
All right, moving on. Hey, more Stellantis news about bringing back things that a certain president was trying to kill off. What a surprise. So they confirmed the midsize pickup is coming back. Dakota. I don't know if they're going to call it Dakota.
Was that off the menu? Because like I feel like they were teasing it for a while.
Well, yeah, but I mean, when's the last time they sold the Dakota? It's been a while. They haven't brought it for quite a while yet, but they officially are bringing it back, and I think they were teasing it to try to gain interest. I'm just totally speculating internally, and then the higher ups were like, "No, it's not happening." So as soon as someone left, they're like, "It's coming back," and they're making a second-gen Durango, which totally makes sense because the two will share a platform. So that means the Durango's
third gen.
Yeah. But I mean, the Durango was going away. Like, I remember how Chrysler kind of has a minivan. We were like, Dodge was poised to have an electric charger, or eventually a gas, and a Dart, not a Dart, a Hornet.
So I was always under the impression that while the current Durango was heading out, I assumed there was going to be a new one, only because like it's a pretty successful product for Dodge, and if you get rid of it, otherwise you don't have anything outside of the Hornet. So I always assumed this was going to happen. It's good to know that it's confirmed. It's weird that it wasn't earlier.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think like, well, it needed a platform, yeah, but doesn't it in the Grand Cherokee? Aren't they like somewhat siblings? So like, you're not killing the Grand Cherokee anytime soon. So there should have always been something for it. But maybe that's the whole thing. Like, we're going to have a pickup and a new Durango and obviously a new Grand Cherokee and back to the status quo. And when do they announce the V8's going in one of them? Because you know that's coming. That's my prediction for this year. And it's going to happen earlier than I thought.
Yeah, based on what's happening down south. The midsize truck is a tough one, only because I'm wondering what you do in terms of a platform. It could be unibody. I mean, we're seeing success elsewhere. I don't know if Dodge buyers would be okay with it, but I mean, the Ridgeline sells, the Santa Cruz, the Maverick. There's maybe a market, because the tough thing with mid-sized trucks is for very little more money, you can, for a small amount of extra money, you can go into a full size. So maybe the angle for a mid-size is, it's unibody, but it rides a little more friendly and car-like. I'm very curious. Like, I want to see Dodge back in the mid-size segment. So that's good.
I think if there's someone that's going to do it, it's Dodge that would make that change. I mean, they have the front wheel drive cargo van that you thought wouldn't fly, and I see them around a lot. The Charger's gone electric, so I mean, the Charger could be the platform. Maybe toughen that thing up, but I could see them having a unibody. But
it could just be a Durango, or like it could be on the Grand Cherokee platform, right?
Yeah, like it could be a unibody, but then they'll put like the 550 horsepower Huracan to launch it, so everyone forgets what it is. But I mean, that's what Dodge does. Like, they know how to get around these things. So, and I think it would be successful. Like you said, look at the Maverick, look at the Ridgeline. They sell like crazy, and the Canyon, I don't think so. The Rangers had off and on success. The new one, I think, is much improved, but it's hard finding that formula. So, yeah, good for them.
Yeah.
Speaking of coming back, the Shelby GT350 is back, but it's not really the same one that left. Let's say it's actually going back to the previous. So from 2000 and I don't know, late 2010s, you could get a Shelby GT350, but it was you bought a Mustang GT and sent it to Shelby, and they did a conversion. And then the last gen, the amazing GT350 with the flat plane crank that revved to like I don't know 43,000 RPM, that was in house with Ford. This is going back to you get a GT and you give it to Shelby, but they're just gonna slap a supercharger on it and you can get 800 and I think 10 horsepower or 830 if you want the R. So
Okay, I mean, sure. I just want that flat plane crank.
I'm curious if you got the absolute base GT, sent it to Shelby to become GT350, where it lines up in total price to a dark horse, because you have about 300 more horsepower. You know what I mean? Like,
Oh,
if it's 20 grand more, that's totally a deal. If it's like 50 grand more, okay, that's a bit much. But
and I mean, if you're worried about the handling disadvantage versus a dark horse, get the GT with the track package. You get pretty close.
I'm sure Shelby's putting like it's not just a supercharger. I'm sure the brakes and the tires, everything's going to be upgraded. Suspension, especially with the 350 name. If it was at the 500, it might just be like drag strip power, but the 350 has always been the track one. So I guess Ford's going to keep an eye on this to make sure it doesn't get anywhere near the GTD in terms of performance. But
it won't. The GTD is basically it's a Ford GT wearing a Mustang coat.
Well, it's not quite mid-engine, but yes, it's
but yeah, like
it is the GTD. Like they aren't even hiding it. Like this is our race car.
Yeah. No, I mean that looked really good. Oh, okay. You know what? Never mind. I don't even. Let's move on to the next subject.
So this is funny because we have both driven the Lyric and we both really like it, and we both commented how it didn't need for power. But Cadillac wants to push their V, which, you know what? Good for them. They've stuck with it for 20 years, and it's something now. Like, you hear V, it's Cadillac. Like, it takes a while to get it. The Hyundai is sort of on that arc right now where people are starting to know what an N is. So this needed a V, and this is going to sound so first world problem, but it's got 610 horsepower and will do 0 to 60 in 3.3 seconds. And I was like, that's it? Because we're just so used to ridiculous electric vehicles. This thing is still going to melt brains and be crazy fast. But yeah, I will gladly take a more powerful Lyric with a V on the back, and I really can't wait to drive this.
Is it its most powerful electric vehicle? Because I feel like the Escalade V makes more, or the Escalade IQ makes more power. The Escalade IQ makes 750. In its whatever they call it mode. It's not WTF. It's not watts to freedom. It's velocity max or something. So but it's not as quick.
It's basically what the Silverado RST has, where it has 700 something horsepower. But like I said, if you're not in that launch mode, it's like 200 less. There's a dramatic difference. So maybe that's what they're getting at without saying so much. Is this is always 610, and that's
always okay. Yeah. Okay, so this is 610, so it's an upgrade of 110 horsepower. Is it Lyric -V? Because I think that's the first time they. Oh wait, no, that's right. They do -V normally. Okay, never mind. I mean, fascinating. I'm excited because we both love the Vs, the current Blackwings. We never did get to drive an Escalade V, but I assume it's ridiculous. I mean, the Lyric is such a good platform. The things that we value for sporty cars, like a low center of gravity, exists in the Lyric. And yeah, I trust GM's engineers to make a really fun vehicle. Will it be Ioniq 5N levels of fun? I don't know, because Cadillac's not quite that sort of part of the market, but
yeah,
heck yes, this just shot up the list.
No. Start with that. That'd be like if they do an Optic V or something. That's where you're maybe going to start throwing on some of the suspension. I'm just reading it. It does have 22-inch wheels, but I doubt it has handling.
And the same size battery, so less range.
Yeah, 102.
Okay, yeah. I mean, cool. Yeah, I'm. This just shot up the list to one of the cars I'm most excited to drive in the new year. I really enjoyed the Lyric. I have a family member who just bought one. Yeah, cool.
So
way to go, Cadillac.
285 miles is 285 is their estimate, which is down from like.
Wow, so it doesn't lose a whole lot. Yeah.
And then you can get the big onboard charger, which similar to, actually, I think it's even more powerful than what I had in the Buzz, and I was blown away at how much power it can suck out of just a 110 volt even. So
It's
yeah,
like a 19.2 or something.
yeah, I think it's
Yeah,
not, yeah,
dang.
because I think the Volkswagens was 16 point something, and I think that's 19.2. Which yeah, I
Nice.
mean, so it will take every bit of electricity that everything up to a fast charger is willing to offer. So
Yeah, cool.
good for it, and yeah, like can't wait to drive it. And we are saying goodbye to a car that I've had uh, mixed interactions with. So Lexus is killing off the RC, which also means the RCF. Basically, they're getting rid of their coupe, which I am absolutely shocked it lasted this long. I know
Yeah,
it was the more affordable version, but when you got the LC, it was sort of like, do you need two coupes? Um,
yeah.
but yeah, I mean, this going away, sadly, I think the IS is not far behind it, and I don't know if they get replaced because that segment I don't think is doing that much for Lexus, so they're not going to focus on it.
No, it's I think you're right. The RC is always a weird one. We were actually talking about this last night at the event that I'm at. The RC has always been three Lexus platforms and a trench coat. It's like an amalgamation, right? It's a Frankenstein of a platform. There's like old IS convertible in there, and it's a weird spot because BMW has the 4 Series. Audi had the A5, which is now the sedan. Mercedes has the whatever it was E-Class Coupe. Now it's CLE. This didn't really have an identity of its own outside of just not being German. And yeah, the RCF is a V8, and it's the only one in its class that was a naturally aspirated V8. But like you said, the LC exists, and yeah, the LC is more expensive, but it also looks like an LC. This is just weird, and it feels very old inside. It's got the old infotainment. Yeah, and
I was gonna say, like for reference, before I took my 6-year hiatus from this job 3 years ago, so we're talking a decade ago, I drove this car. So like it's well over 10 years old, and it hasn't changed much in that time.
its facelift was like 2020. So yeah, it needs to go. I'm not surprised they're not going to replace it. Maybe they will down the road with something else, but it's not really a lucrative part of the market. The IS is interesting, like you said. It's I don't feel like it has long to go. I know it got a substantial refresh a few years ago, but it's still on the old platform. It still has old infotainment. It doesn't really keep pace with the rest of the sedans in the class. So yeah, it's rationalizing the lineup, right? Like these don't make sense
Yeah,
anymore.
the what it is Lexus call that touchpad thing. That's probably not doing them any favors.
I forget what it's called. I know like Acura's is True Touch or something. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Anyway,
so as I said, I have mixed feelings with it. Is when it first came out in like whatever 2015 or something, 14, way back then.
yeah.
The F was so cool. It was this wide body, had this big V8. It was kind of nice. Like, well, it wasn't kind of nice. It was really nice. It sounded great and everything. And I really liked that car. And then the 350 was okay, but they had the 350 all-wheel drive, and it almost felt like an afterthought because the front end looked like it got jacked up 3 or 4 inches compared to the rear end. It had this weird stance.
Hmm.
And then that's like a decade ago, and things have changed, and the RCF just it's not competitive, even though it's still the only naturally aspirated V8. That sort of price and class, everything's gotten more powerful, more luxurious, more refined. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
All right, moving on. Another, well, this never existed, so we can't say they're killing it off. But Nissan has decided to can their subcompact crossover electric, and this was supposed to be not quite next, I think, for them, but soon because they're really pushing the EV. And I think this is just another reflection sign of times. This,
So it's essentially like a Leaf replacement, but crossover.
yeah, that's what
It-
they when I went and they introduced a bunch of the SEMA cars and the Rogue plug-in and the Murano and all that. They kind of hinted at this but didn't, and I remember it was a big deal before. So I think yeah, it's not just a North America thing, which clearly you're not going to invest in EVs for the next couple of years, but just worldwide. There's some countries where it's taken off and it hasn't in others, and I think governments and manufacturers kind of underestimated people's willingness not to buy an EV, I guess.
yeah, I mean, it seems I mean, it's easy for me to be an armchair critic, quite literally. It it seems like a poor choice in my mind, but when we consider this whole Honda merger, yeah, maybe canceling products that are unlikely to make you money in the short term is a good idea.
I
Like,
was gonna
like,
say, Nissan, this probably is a good idea because
yeah,
they aren't making much money. So yeah, like this is not, even if you make money, it's gonna be a break even project at best. So maybe you put that into a Qashqai Rogue Sport replacement. Like they're missing. I know they have the kicks that's
that's the
bigger now, but
kicks.
I don't know if the kicks really
Yeah,
plays there.
no, I agree with you, but no, it's tough, right? Because like we know that electrics are more expensive than gas currently, and subcompact is a tough category because it's so price relevant when it comes to buyer consideration. You can't really ignore that. It's why most EVs are the next size up. So it makes sense. I'm disappointed because I want to see Nissan do more EVs. They're one of the first to really do it, but this was not the best idea. Like maybe work on other ones.
Ask Mazda how a city-based, low-range, small electric SUV did. I mean, it was a good product. It was just there wasn't the market for it.
We'll sell dozens of them, dozens.
All right, well, that wraps it up for the news and reviews. We will be taking a very short break, and I will be back with Greg to talk products. Then we'll take a longer break, and Kyle and I will be back to sort of give everyone insight as to what got us to this point in life. Well, that sounded a lot deeper than I mentioned. Anyway, this is the Auto Guide Show brought to you by eBay Motors. We'll be back in a couple seconds. Swapping out your tires? There's nothing like it. With eBay, you'll find the feel you're looking for, from smooth highway rides to grip for rough terrain. Get all the tires you need at prices you'll love. eBay, things people love. Okay, welcome back, and it is our second installment of our new segment where we have Greg join us to talk about basically necessary car products. These are things that I think everyone needs to have in their vehicle, or at least in their garage if they have one.
What's up, Mike? How's it going? Happy Friday.
Yes. Although this is airing Monday, but we always say that. It's really tough when you're trying to predict races on the weekend.
That's true.
Yeah, Kyle and I would always be like, so this might happen. But yes. So yes, happy Friday.
All right.
What do we have this week?
So we have some tire inflators, both I would say portable and like semi-portable. There's some that you could just basically throw in the back of your SUV, and then others that, and they obviously are charged, others that require a plug. So we've got a pretty cool list. We actually just kind of updated it last week. If you're listening to this, it's pretty easy to find. It's right up there on the site. Our top pick is actually the Noco Air 10 tire inflator, which is decent, reasonable price on Amazon too. If you're, looking around, that's about 110, 111 bucks. Then a bunch of other ones on here that I certainly encourage you to check out. One that I actually have in my garage is the Husky 120 volt. Now this is one that literally you're going to want to keep in your garage because you do have to plug it in to just like a regular outlet. But I've used it for all sorts of things, bikes, inner tubes. There's nothing worse than like, getting ready to go out to the beach and you've got to realize, oh, I just have to inflate this with my own lungs. That's not good. So it's very versatile. And I've also used it, and this is where I think it deserves its most praise. I had a 2006 Charger in my garage that wasn't getting driven much because, like you, Mike, I'm in press cars fairly regularly, and just the tires, they several of them deflated. And that's not a good thing. And I was a little skeptical that this thing would actually have the muscle to really pump up tires on an actual car. And it did. Inflated 3 of the 4 that were quite deflated. So this one works for me, but there's a lot of good ones on this list. And, especially this time of year, it's cold out, snowy, literally everywhere. It looked like even New Orleans was getting some snow. It's good to have something like this in your garage in case your tires get a little low. Or, of course, if you're on the road, if there's one that doesn't require a cord, we've got a few of them on the list here too. Check those out.
Yeah, it's good thing you brought up about the capability to do it, because there are all sorts of price points and power points, and even the weakest ones will probably charge or probably pump up your tire, but it'll take forever.
Yeah.
I have one that's I always have one that plugs into the cars because living in Toronto, I have to swap tires for summer, winter. I do mine, I do some in-laws, I do some family. So I have like a little portable case and that goes in it. And I got a pretty decent quality one and it pumps up any tire, any bike, car, SUV, fine. But I've been to people's houses and they say, "Oh, I got a pump," and they bring it out and it gets to like 5 psi and it's done. Whereas my father-in-law had an actual air canister in his garage that you would fill up and then it would just hold it, and then you use that to pump up tires or blow out pipes or whatever. You could probably pump up a truck tire with those. But so you mentioned battery and you mentioned plug into the garage. Is there limits to either of those in terms of power or functionality?
For these, it sort of depends on the circumstances. It's, you want to use, I think, common sense too. You don't want to have a situation where you're trying to inflate like, your Wrangler off-road mudders or something, and you're using something that's a bit underpowered or something. For example, with the Husky, it took, I'd say maybe 10 minutes or less to inflate totally flat tires. And that was really good because it allowed me to then drive it to a repair shop where they did a whole bunch of other things. I mean, frankly, given that we're doing more equipment stuff, could have like a whole segment here on this '06 Charger that I've brought back from the dead. And then I ended up getting new tires, which I suppose could be a different segment. General Ultimaxes.
Did it with my 2010 Genesis. We brought that thing back from the brink and modified it. So
yeah, it's fun actually. It's very satisfying to do just like maybe like $800, $1,500 worth of like, I would call it work/maintenance, structural things, but not big things. And hey, your car's back on the road and back and moving.
I think an important note too for some listeners and viewers is depending on your vehicle could dictate the kind of compressor you need, because it's usually not, volume of air, it's the PSI that they kind of limit at because it's how hard they have to push. And some EVs, their tires are like 60, 70 PSI, which is way higher than your average vehicle. And I don't know if I'm sure there's a lot of compressors that can't handle that.
Yeah, I mean, a good one we have here is the Astro AI inflator. I don't think that's AI per se, but it'll do up to 250 PSI or as low as so I don't know what you're going to inflate with that, but I was driving, I think it was the GMC Hummer, and I don't recall what the PSI was on those tires, but it was something that just made my head explode. I couldn't believe it. So, that is something to be, you need to be aware of it. It's not like every tire is like 32, like it was, like it seemed like when we were growing up, you just kind of winged it, pulled out the little pencil thing, and there you go.
I remember. Sorry, go on.
No, there could be a wide discrepancy.
Yeah, like I said, I remember like if you got a car and it was like 30 or 32, you're like, whoa, this is low pressure. It must be for whatever. And then 36 was about as high. And I remember I came across a 40 once. I think it might have been a BMW. It was something with really low tires. But to your Hummer, I can't remember what those giant tires take. I know it's something high, but it's because of the weight, right? But I do remember the Silverado RST EV, the fancy one. It's 68 PSI, either all around or at 68 front, 71 rear, which is just like bike tires aren't that high, and those are usually the big ones.
It looks like, just doing some quick Googling, the Silverado is 61 and the Hummer is actually only 45, which isn't quite as crazy as I remember it. But I mean, those are still pretty serious tires. So
that's for the LT. If you get the RST with those 24-inch wheels, it goes to 67 because they're lower profile, because there's like only this much tire to fill up.
I drove the RST. That's a lot of truck. It's fun, but
it's got great range, but it takes a year to charge. But that's a different topic.
Indeed.
Yeah, so just to wrap this up, one recommendation I have, and most are like this, but find one where you can set the PSI and it'll turn itself off at that point, especially if you're pumping up your kids' sketchy old bike tires that are like you're the third owner of it. You're afraid might explode at full PSI. You don't have to physically be in the vicinity of it. That's always a good plus too. Yeah,
that's a good call. You want to have some idea what you're doing, especially if you're it sounds like both of us have kind of a one size fits all. You're doing tires in cars, you're doing tires in bikes. I mean, I've pumped up a football with some of the ones I've had in my garage, whether they were super expensive, the inflators, not the football, or something cheap. So,
Yeah, no, I'm the same. I pumped up many a soccer ball of football with mine as well. And you got to be careful because it pumps out fast. But
yeah, that's true.
all right, well, everyone can check that article out on AutoGuide.com to give them some insight and some help as to what to look for. And we'll see you back next week.
See you later, Mike.
Picture this. You're in the garage, your favorite room in the house, and you're tuning up your engine with parts you found on eBay. Every piece is just locking perfectly into place. You step back to admire your work, hands covered in grease, and because you're committed to driving that thing further than the odometer can handle, you start to think to yourself, you know what, I could probably also use some new brakes, some shocks and struts, and this baby deserves a new air filter. So you head right back to eBay. You can find any part you need there, it's unreal. From wipers and headlights to cold air intakes, exhaust systems, and even that turbo you've had on your mind, eBay is the stocked garage of your dreams. And you've got eBay Guaranteed Fit. Because eBay knows DIY fixes can be major, and mods are always intense, so you need to know that these parts guaranteed to fit every time before you dive in wrench first. And in the off chance you order a part and it doesn't fit, send it back, simple as that. You know what you love more than the car itself is driving it. You're serious when it comes to engine maintenance, and you're locked in when you're headed into a build. And that's exactly why you start with eBay, minor fix or complete overhaul. You want to get your ride back on the road, and you've got eBay Guaranteed Fit. So eBay created My Garage, where all you have to do is add your ride's info and get the exact parts that fit. When you see the green check, you're a click away from that part clicking perfectly into place. So now that you know all that, imagine standing at that open garage door looking at your car you love more than anything, knowing that anything is possible. Whether it's keeping it on the road forever or turning it into something that's never been on the road before. Because with eBay, your garage just got a whole lot bigger. Get all the parts you need at prices you love, guaranteed to fit every time. eBay, things people love. All right, welcome back. So yeah, like I said, we will be having some very, very interesting people in this segment in the next several weeks, hopefully forever. Like, I just hope we can keep bringing people on and they want to come. And some of the people we have lined up that are potential, you'll be surprised. But for this week, to sort of kick it off, I thought Kyle and I will kind of go through it. We're going to talk to people. So we are getting automotive personalities, enthusiasts, collectors, just people who have an interesting story to tell about vehicles, sort of how they got there, what they're doing with them, that sort of thing. So I thought we'd start and just ask Kyle, like, what got you into cars and how did you sort of initially transfer that into a job?
Oh, man, I apologize to listeners because Mike set it up as like interesting people, but you're stuck with me. So one thing I really enjoy about this weird industry that we're in is that a lot of people don't come into it directly, right? Like, a lot of people still go to journalism school, but others just come by it because they love cars. And for me, I'm sure I'm not alone when I say that my dad had an interest in cars, but that was before I was born. He was a big muscle car guy, and then he got very practical when he had kids. But he tried to cultivate like an interest in it with me, with going to the auto show, and he got me a little game called Gran Turismo when I was a kid, and I got hooked on it, played it a bunch in a really fun way. Before esports was an actual official dictionary term, I entered a competition in post-secondary and won a year's tuition playing Gran Turismo 4. I have the giant novelty check to prove it. It's ridiculous. I still don't believe that happened. But yeah, I really got into that, and it led me into the gaming side of journalism, and specifically racing games, sim racing. And I eventually got invited to go to real car drives and, provide a review from that, because it is fascinating, and maybe that's something we'll talk about in future episodes. The level of interaction and access that modern video game developers have getting to these cars, right? Like, these cars launch digitally and in real life. And so it takes 6 months to a year to build them in the game. And so the amount of info is fascinating. I went on a launch. It was very cool. And No offense to my previous previous beat, more interesting. And yeah, I ended up doing this. I have a sort of a writing background with advertising, and I just love cars. I love every aspect of them. I love the commuter cars. I love the sports cars, and started writing about this more often, and ended up here. And now I get to do this wild job. I'm not even at home. I'm talking to you from California, and on the beginning of a drive event.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I already know all this, but the listeners are here for the first time. The GT4 thing's pretty cool because that wasn't super sim yet. And
Mhm.
but Gran Turismo already sort of was ahead of the game, knowing where I think the industry was going. I mean, remember the GT Academy, and that was really based around Gran Turismo 5. And I remember at the time thinking like, this is a novelty, but whatever. And then, I mean, look at today, they're not necessarily transferring many sim racers to real racers, but esports and sim racing has gotten huge. And I mean, some of them have, like, there's some huge YouTubers that race now in real life as much as they do online, and they're pretty um, good at it because there is such a correlation, especially when you get the right kind of gear. Like, you can get hydraulic brake setups and force feedback steering wheels. And yeah,
I think about Max Verstappen as like a really good ambassador for sim racing, right? Is like you hear these stories on race weekends. He's on a sim doing some endurance race the day before his race. Like there are a lot of transferable skills. If the world champion can be good in sim racing and good in real life. Like I think that's a really positive message for people. And also, I mean, cars aren't getting any cheaper, right? Like a lot of people's first experiences with cars are going to be digitally. And I think that's a fascinating, cool angle for a lot of people involved in this scene.
I think you're even underselling the Verstappen thing because you hear stories where like he wins whatever race, and then a couple hours later he's online just dominating the best sim racers in the world because it's just his talent extends to everything. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's very interesting. It's some of those parallels I think are with a lot of people around our age range that got into this. They're like key things that happened or pushed us. So, I mean, I was always into cars, and no one in my family was. My uncle was. He owned some really cool cars when I was a kid. Like he had a '50s pickup, then he had a '58 Cadillac for a long time, then he had a '71 Monte Carlo, and now he has a '30s Cadillac. So he's always had
Wow.
like a toy, but that still wasn't the real influence. Like Hot Wheels. I was the kid because I grew up in the '80s, so I was Hot Wheels kid. And then like video games were a thing. Like I had a Sega and then a Genesis, and they had racing games like Outrun and Spy Hunter and things like that. Ayrton Senna's Monaco Grand Prix 2. Like I love that game. Like it was the first game where like you could get on teams and contracts, and it was cool. But all the games were either like racing leagues or like these arcadey smash up things. And then
Mhm.
when I was a teenager in the 90s, if you said to me at like 15, 16, 17, what's your dream job? I'd be like, I want to write a car and driver. I was subscribed to the magazine. But even getting into that, it was, I think I was in grade 10 and I liked cars and I had to do some project for business class. And I can't even remember what it was about, but I had to do with, I don't know, media or something. But I went and bought a car and driver randomly, buyer's guide. And my um, project was on pickup trucks, and I was like comparing trucks from what they said in the magazine on their buyer's guide. But then I was like reading the buyer's guide, and then I started buying their magazines. And I'd say by the time I was 16, like I got my license on my birthday, and it wasn't I got any more into cars, but I had a direction like, oh, here's a source to learn about new ones. And then when I
Mhm.
was like a year later, Gran Turismo came out, like you said, and that was the game for me because up to that point, I played a lot of test drives and Need for Speeds, and even then, it was like I loved learning like real cars in there. I remember one of the test drives you get muscle cars. And that was like the first time muscle cars were in a game. I was like, oh my goodness, like real like Camaro SSs and stuff. And then Gran Turismo was like the game for me. It was so realistic, which is hilarious now looking at the original Gran Turismo graphics, but the cars finally looked like real cars. And you were driving Civics and WRXs and Corvettes and like just regular cars. And then another thing, then the Fast and Furious came out, and although it's not like that's where I wanted to go, that made car stuff cool, and Top Gear came out, and that cemented it. So then I wasn't like the weird lone kid that liked cars. Um,
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
but then my career went nowhere. I didn't go to the university for this. My sister went to university for journalism, but I didn't. I was working at Auto Trader doing not like I was around cars. Every job I've had since I've been 19 has been with cars. I worked at a dealership. I worked rental cars for many years. Then I went to Auto Trader and took pictures of cars. But I just happened to sort of luck into a backdoor position there for writing about cars, and then I was like hooked. But it's interesting because you're right. There's very few who come out of university with a journalism degree, get hired by a company to write cars. Like it's almost like you need to have the knowledge and passion more than the skill. Like you can learn the skill, like you hear in sports too. If you don't have the natural interest, it's really hard to want to do this job because it becomes a grind like any job. And there's enough people lined up that want to do it for the passion that they'll gladly come.
I would say though, like to that point, I think what maybe the industry actually kind of needs is people who are less traditionally car people. I think if you think about it, the vast majority of people who buy cars aren't car people. They are buying a tool, and so I think what a really good bridge we need to gap is getting those people who like what matters to them in cars in a way that can make it interesting and engaging for them. Like you and I, like we're just car nuts. We think about cars all the time. But I love hearing from people who aren't really as obsessive with all the aspects because I want to know their opinions. I want to know what makes them change their minds about cars. And that's what's so interesting these days is that this industry, like the car industry, is kind of going through a change, and the old guard has been kind of aging out and retiring. COVID actually kind of helped that too in a way because a lot of people were like, you know what, I'm almost done anyway, and like things change so quickly. I'm just gonna check out. It's a really exciting time, and I think, like you said, like a lot of stuff can be taught, like writing or even being on video can be sort of taught, and you can learn these skills. It's just an interest. I think an interest to always learn new things at the end of the day is kind of like the kernel that helps us. Yeah,
no, you're right. And I think there's just over, quite many years, like decades even, the interest in cars and the way they're designed. And we talked about this with the 90s convertibles is different because so many things are automated and assisted and whatnot. Like I remember reading in magazines and it was all about, well, this SUV was the sportiest feeling, so it's the best, or this sedan, grip the hardest. And I think part of it was people look too much enthusiast, and I've always not really had that angle. I mean, I love the performance cars, but I remember going to different organizations where we would do voting on cars, and the ones people were voting for were like not a great pick for the segment, but it handled the best. But like, who cares? Like, no one cares if they're 3-row SUV or minivan's the best handling. And I think what's helped me is in my moderate circle of family and friends, I'm the only one even remotely into cars. So I'm trying. So like, no one wants to talk about it. When they do, it's like you get the perspective that people actually pay. And I see people making comments online or in person about X car, like, how does anyone buy this? This is ridiculous, and yet it sells so much. It's like because it's what consumers want. Like, I mean, we said it many times. Like one of the ones I go to is Subarus. People are like Crosstrek and Forester are competitive, this and that, but they are easy, dead simple to drive. They have amazing sight lines. They're really good in poor conditions, and that's what consumers care about. And they're very anonymous, and that's what they care about too. A lot of people don't want a car that sticks out. So
they're not super fancy inside. They're like they're built solidly enough that you're not like terrified of damaging anything in the inside. They feel robust, and like that's what people want. It's go ahead, sorry.
I was gonna say it's a Toyota school of thought. Like Toyota got so successful that way. Like everyone's always like Toyota's interiors are not as quality and drab and the exteriors, but that was because they didn't break down and they're so easy to use. And like you said, you're not there's not really fancy materials to scratch. So without having to go on and listening to us, that's sort of how we got here, are the origins of us getting into this, and far more interesting people with far more interesting careers and positions we will be covering over the next many weeks. So we're going to step away for a quick second and be right back with what is next for us before we say goodbye. All right, so to end this off quickly, Kyle, as you've mentioned, you have been going from program to program to program, yet you still have a vehicle at home. You got a lot on your plate this week.
Yes. So I am currently in Carlsbad, just north of San Diego, California, to drive the Jeep Wagoneer S, which actually the review will be live by the time you can listen to this episode. So head on over to AutoGuide.com to read my thoughts on it. Also, I just drove the Toyota 4Runner, which will be going out the day after this. So there will be a lot of stuff. Please go to the site. And then actually next week I will be driving a new Lexus. And I have the Volvo EX30 at home. So like you said, a lot of stuff coming up. So stay tuned.
Well, I was far less exciting this week. I stuck around here, but I do have a Mazda 3, and it's the manual. It is one of the only manual hatches left. If not the only. I mean,
the only regular powered one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of like the regular car, but calling a Mazda 3 a regular car is even a stretch because it's very different. It's very like it's a form over function premium small car, but we'll get to all that later. Next week, then we are in more hatchbacks. It is the Prius versus the Civic Hybrid head to head, and I'm very excited for that. I'm very curious how it's going to match out.
Yeah, we've heard nothing but good things from colleagues. Like Greg's already driven the Civic Hybrid hatch. So really exciting week.
Yeah, my neighbor bought one. She loves it. And I said, from what I've heard, it's great. So yeah, it'll be fun, and we'll be back with another episode and some new guests. So until then, we will see you later.
So long, everybody.
Picture this. You're halfway through a DIY car fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. It's okay, because you know whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got everything: brakes, headlights, cold air intakes, whatever you need, and it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers and hoping you ordered the right thing. All the parts you need, at the prices you'll love, guaranteed fit every time. eBay, things people love.